My father was a famous chef throughout the area. His roasted whole lamb had crispy skin and tender meat, and everyone drooled. The regent's concubine heard about this and asked my father to come to the palace to cook, specifically requesting this roasted whole lamb. My father went, and when he was thrown out, his skin and flesh were all burnt to pieces. It turned out that the concubine had suddenly decided to roast lamb without the lamb flavor. When my mother found out, she didn't shed a single tear. But 3 months later, she set up a large pot at the palace gate and started selling lamb. 2 months after my father's death, my mother took the remaining money from the family and went to the home of Lou Posey at the end of the alley. Lou Posey was a miraculous woman with a pair of skilled hands. She could turn married women back into virgins. But it was said that the pain was so severe that a young woman once cried out in pain all night and almost died. But when my mother returned, she didn't cry out in pain, but her face was a little pale. She called me over and said, "Aining, from now on you can't call me mother anymore, you can only call me sister. Do you understand why?" I nodded, I understand. My mother smiled and praised me for being sensible. She took me to the capital and found a dilapidated old house to live in. Later, she set up a large pot on the street in front of the regent's palace and started selling mutton soup. My mother learned the art of cooking mutton from my father. My father was a famous chef in the area, and his specialty was roasting whole lamb. Although roasted, my father's roasted whole lamb was more flavorful than others. The skin was crispy, the meat was tender, and the meat was rich and fragrant, yet not pungent. Even people who usually claimed not to eat mutton would be tempted to devour piece after piece after piece. While my father cooked, my mother helped in the backyard. Many other restaurant owners would solicit customers in the front hall, but my mother never showed up. I understand why. It's because my mother is so beautiful, and beauty easily attracts gossip. My family, however, are all helpless, ordinary people. We can't afford to cause trouble in this world, and we just want to avoid it. The only time my father got attention was when the people in the Prince Regent's palace heard that his roasted whole lamb was the best in the world and invited him to cook for the prince. My father happily told my mother, "This time the reward will be generous. I'll buy you some new clothes in Beijing and make a pair of pure gold bunnies for our Ning as a dowry." I loved bunnies the most, so I immediately threw myself into my father's arms. "Bunnies. I want bunnies." My father, beaming, slung me across the house on his back. My mother, laughing, tried to stop him. "Don't let the kids fall again." Those times felt like a dream. If I had known, I wouldn't have wanted the bunnies. I only wanted my father. My father was thrown out of the regent's palace's back door by servants. The streets were full of people, but no one dared to pick him up. He was a scorched corpse, his skin black, blood and pus oozing from the cracks. Finally, a kind-hearted man from my hometown took advantage of the night to pull him back on a cart. He cried and cursed, "It's all that Lu Muyao. It's all her. Lu Muyao, what a beautiful name." She was the regent's new concubine, and the most beautiful woman in the capital. Hearing that my father was skilled at roasting lamb, she asked him, "I heard you can roast lamb so that it has no mutton smell at all." My father replied truthfully, "Don't worry, auntie. This lamb will definitely not have any mutton smell." Lu Muyao suddenly stopped smiling. She asked, "How can it be roasted without any mutton smell?" My father smiled apologetically, "It's a roasted whole lamb, so how can it not have any mutton smell at all?" Lu Muyao clutched her handkerchief and said coldly, "Who said it wouldn't have any mutton smell? How about I cook you a roasted whole lamb without any mutton smell?" She had my father's mouth gagged, tied up like a lamb, and roasted over the fire. As the flames blazed, Lu Muyao covered her mouth with her handkerchief and laughed, "Isn't this a roasted whole lamb without any mutton smell?" Finally, she looked at my father, whose skin and flesh were torn apart by the roasting, with a venomous look in her eyes. "I told you I'd never be a concubine." Even the prince agreed. "Who the hell do you think you are? How dare you call me aunt?" Lu Muyao hated being called a concubine. She was an orphan without parents, brought back from the battlefield by Shawan. They'd lived and died together, their lives exchanged, their bond deep. But Shawan already had a wife at home, married by his parents' orders. This wife came from a prominent family, and even if Shawan didn't have much affection for her, he couldn't divorce her. Therefore, the only title left for Lu Muya was aunt. But she refused. Brother An and I lived and died together on the battlefields of the northern frontier. We swore to be together forever, with the snow-capped mountains as witness. Now you want me to be a concubine? Absolutely not. She preferred to stay by Shawan's side without any official status, telling him, "It doesn't matter what the world thinks of me, as long as you treat me as your only wife." Shawan was moved and filled with guilt. Touched by Lu Muya's unwavering devotion, yet remorseful that he had concealed his marriage, he could only treat her all the better. When Lu Muya expressed a craving for river food, Shawan immediately dispatched a 1,000-mile trip south of the Yangtze River, bringing back fresh fish and shrimp. She suffered a headache and fever, Southwest Shao and postponed court and stayed with her at the palace. As for her public roasting of an innocent civilian due to her bad mood, while a slight headache for Shawan, it wasn't a big deal. He simply sighed, "Never mind. Muya's primary concern is status, and it's also this outsider's fault for being so naive. Since no one was killed, tell the housekeeper to pay more for his medical treatment." My mother, after hearing these words relayed by her fellow townsmen, said nothing. She simply used a spoon to gently try to feed my father some water. My father couldn't drink. With a simple word of healing from a superior, it could be treated as if nothing had happened. But how can one be cured when 60 to 70% of his skin is burnt black and festering? Several doctors have come to see him, but they all shook their heads and said there's no cure. They could only watch him fester and die. In truth, my father should have died long ago. The only reason he managed to hold on to his last breath was because he had something to say to my mother. With a struggle to open his mouth, my father used his last bit of strength to say, "Lan Fu, you must not, don't." "I know. Don't seek revenge," my mother whispered, gently holding my father's hand. "Don't worry, I won't put myself in danger. He's the regent. Even the emperor respects him. How many lives do I, an ordinary woman, have to avenge you? As for me, I'll just live a good life with a Ning from now on. You've saved quite a bit of money anyway. I'll close the shop and go on outings with a Ning in the spring, admire the lotus in the summer, make osmanthus cakes in the autumn, and build snowmen in the winter." My father was relieved. He closed his eyes peacefully, a tear trickling from the corner of his eye. My mother wiped away his tear, gently and softly, afraid to hurt my father. "Have a good sleep. When you wake up, I'll still be your wife." With these words, my mother picked up the orchid hairpin my father had given her as their engagement. Closing her eyes, she steadied her hand again and again, then aimed the hairpin at the blackened throat and inserted it. After my father's funeral, I found a pair of tiny golden rabbits in his bundle. I hugged them tightly. Tears washed away the blood from the rabbits and I wiped my eyes. "Mother, I want to go to the capital." My mother looked at the white paper money flying through the air, was silent for a long time, and whispered, "Of course, we must go to the capital. People say that rice is expensive in the capital, and living in a big city is hard." But for my mother and me, it didn't seem so difficult. My mother was a skilled cook. Once she set up a pot, people would flock to her. I was nimble and helped to attract customers and collect money at the stall. "Sir, your mutton soup is delicious, please have more." The mutton soup was thick and white, sprinkled with emerald green chopped green onions, and it was incredibly delicious. Our business was booming. Until one day, just as I picked up the soup, someone kicked me in the back. "And Ning," my mother screamed. She wanted to save me, but the cauldron was immediately kicked over and my mother fell down. Half of the scalding mutton soup poured onto her skirt. Standing in front of me were the servants of the regent's palace. Behind a row of strong men like iron barrels stood a beautiful woman in a goose-yellow skirt. The beautiful woman frowned, her face full of displeasure, smashed their stall for me. Yes. Seeing the servants about to charge, I rushed forward to protect the pot, screaming, "Help! Help!" The servant stretched out his hand and I bit it. He screamed in pain and raised his hand to hit me. Amidst the chaos, a cold voice called out, "What's going on?" The crowd gathered in the distance spontaneously made way, and a man in a dark blue robe stepped forward. He wasn't dressed extravagantly, and he was accompanied by only a single attendant. But upon seeing him, the servants immediately knelt. "Your Highness." It was the regent, the current emperor's uncle, Shaoan. He stepped forward, his face slightly annoyed. "In broad daylight, in this important part of the capital, you're making it seem like a murderous scene. How can this be?" Lu Muyao immediately stepped forward, grasping Shaoan's arm, and pouted in grievance. "Brethren, you know I can't stand the smell of mutton. I was trying to talk to them about moving farther away, but that bastard came up and bit us, and my men accidentally overturned the pot." The servant immediately raised his hand, bloodied by my bite, to testify in Lu Muyao's defense. Shaoan sighed. "Well, let's get them to move the stall." "Yes." Immediately, 2 servants came forward to pull my mother. She struggled to her feet, only to fall back down again. Her skirt fell, revealing her calves, red from being burned. As she was tugged, her veil fell from her head, revealing her face. They say that even a simple woman, with her hairpins and plain clothes, cannot conceal a beautiful woman. For a moment, the 2 servants were stunned. Even Shaoan was slightly startled. Furthermore, the beauty's tears only made her look even more pitiful. Fighting back tears, my mother slowly stood up and kowtowed to Shaoan. "I have offended you, sir. I deserve death. I will move far away and will never appear before you again." With that, my mother, with my support, struggled to her feet and reached for the heavy pot. Her legs had just been burned, and the pot was heavy, and she staggered, looking particularly pitiful. For a moment, I noticed Shaoan instinctively reach out to help my mother. But he quickly withdrew his hand. Lu Muyao also saw this scene. She stood behind Shaoan, glaring at us with resentment. My mother and I moved to West Street and rented a shop for temporary shelter. It was a remote area, with few customers, and we made very little money a day. I went to the nearby mountains to gather herbs, hoping to apply them to my mother's skin to help her feel better. My mother kissed my forehead but threw the herbs into the brazier, saying, "Don't apply them." I understood her meaning, but I couldn't help but tear up. My father loved my mother the most. He'd make a big fuss over even the slightest scrape. Seeing my mother so burned like this must have been heartbreaking for him. My mother, however, looked at her injured leg and whispered, "This isn't even 1/10 as painful as it was back then." Before she finished speaking, the sound of pots and pans crashing could be heard from the front hall. I ran to the front hall and saw Lu Muyao. She came with a dozen maids and servants, who overturned the tables and chairs we had worked so hard to buy, and scattered the kitchen utensils all over the floor. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" I rushed forward and tried to stop them, but I couldn't. Lu Muyao was cracking melon seeds. "Where is the bitch who seduced the prince?" My mother was dragged out from the backyard. Her injuries had not healed yet, and she could hardly walk. Her 2 burned calves dragged on the rough ground, and her skirt was soon stained red. Lu Muyao asked someone to throw her to the ground, then walked up, pinched my mother's face with her sharp nails, and spat the melon seed shells in her mouth on her face. "Bitch, do you think I can't see that you are relying on your own beauty to put on a pitiful look in front of the prince? If I don't teach you a lesson today, I'm afraid I will never give up your desire to climb into bed." The 2 old women held my mother on the left and right, and Lu Muyao pulled out a gold hairpin, and was about to scratch my mother's face. "No." I threw myself forward, shielding my mother with my body, crying out with all my might, "My dear, please, my sister has never done anything wrong. Please kill me, not my sister." Lu Muyao was furious. The hairpin was about to pierce me. A plate flew over and hit the hairpin. the plate shattered, and the hairpin flew out of Lu Muyao's hand. She clutched her wrist and let out a soft cry. I was tightly held in my mother's arms. When I looked up again, I saw a tall, graceful figure standing in the doorway. It was Xiaoan. In the dim light, his face was ashen. The broken porcelain shards scratched Lu Muyao's skin. She clutched her wrist, her eyes wide. Brother, and you. Disbelief quickly gave way to raging rage. She pointed at my mother. You actually attacked me, just for a low-class bitch like that. Why? Just because she has a face that men find attractive. Lu Muyao was furious. She rushed forward, threatening to tear my mother's face apart. Xiaoan strode forward and grabbed Lu Muyao's wrist. How long are you going to keep this up? He whispered. If I don't stop you, you're going to get into a terrible mess. They argued furiously. Finally, Xiaoan's face turned pale with rage, and he blurted out, all the women in the capital combined aren't even half as jealous as you. Lu Muyao froze. Her eyes flushed red, and tears streamed down her face. Yes, no woman in the world is as jealous as I am, she said with a wry smile. But who else but me would have carried you, gravely injured, from the snowy mountains, step by step, carrying you back? Who would have used their blood to make medicine for your treatment? Who would have risked their own life to protect you? Now it seems I'd rather die in the northern frontier. At least you'll remember me forever, rather than being wronged by a bitch like this. Lu Muyao glared at my mother fiercely, then removed the heart-shaped lock from her neck, threw it to the ground, and ran away. The maids and servants knelt in fear. One of the bravest picked up the lock and raised it above her head. Your Highness, Miss Muyao grew up in the northern frontier, and while she may not be as polite as the women in the capital, she's truly devoted to you. If this girl's heart is broken, it will be hard to mend it. Yes, Your Highness, go chase Miss Muyao. She's unfamiliar with the place, running around in the capital. What if she gets into danger? Xiaoan picked up the lock and turned back to my mother. My mother knelt on the ground with her head lowered. From Xiaoan's perspective, all he could see was a piece of her white neck. She obviously felt Xiaoan looking at her, but she didn't look up at him. Xiaoan closed his eyes. In the end, he still held the love lock and went after Lu Muyao. 7 After that, I didn't see Xiaoan for many days. Only the discussions outside the shop brought new news. One by one Xiaoan coaxed Lu Muyao back, and they reconciled. For Lu Muyao's birthday, Xiaoan bought an entire shop full of jade as a gift. Xiaoan asked someone to put up 1,000 colorful lanterns at the Lantern Festival to make Lu Muyao smile. People lamented Xiaoan's favor for Lu Muyao. They also ridiculed my mother. She's so delusional. With such a seductive face, she's hanging around in front of the regent. What else could she be but a seductress? When Miss Muyao is free, we'll deal with her immediately. TSK, I heard that Miss Muyao's methods are extremely cruel. I wonder how long this seductress can live. No wonder they were talking like that. The last person to seduce His Royal Highness the Regent was a maid in the study, who was responsible for grinding ink. She just pinned a few flowers in her hair and smiled at the regent. As a result, her body was found in the well the next day, her face covered with cuts. Women who get between Xiaoan and Lu Muyao always end up with such a tragic end. It was late at night, and I was a little scared. I reached for my mother's hand. Her hand was cold, but her smile was gentle. My mother kissed my forehead. Ning, remember, most people in this world are far from the truth, so their words aren't worth listening to. We just need to focus on our business. Actually, after Lu Muyao's outburst, the shop hadn't had much business. But my mother still diligently cleaned the tables and chairs and prepared the ingredients every day. Finally, on a very quiet night, a horse appeared at the end of the alley. It was Xiaoan. He was alone, pushing open the creaking wooden door. Are you closing? My mother walked out from the backyard. Xiaoan looked at her, and she looked back at him. Moonlight seeped in through the window lattice, and the two of them stared at each other for a moment that seemed both short and long. After that moment, my mother stepped aside and whispered, "Come in, sir. 8 Lu Muyao may never know." Before she and her men overturned the stall at the palace gate, Shaoan had been my mother's regular customer. He had returned from training at the Dalyui camp, exhausted, bathed in the night. My mother had already prepared delicious mutton soup. A steaming bowl of it was the only comfort in the dead of night. Shaoan always ate a bowl before going back to sleep. He wore ordinary clothes and claimed to be a night watchman at the palace. We pretended not to know his identity. Those were beautiful days. Shaoan was no longer the powerful regent, but just a hungry soldier, eating and chatting at a stall owned by a pair of sisters. My mother hadn't had her veil pulled off by Lu Muyao yet. Shaoan couldn't see her face, but he could smell her soft, sweet fragrance, like a spring flower. My mother's temperament was as warm and romantic as a flower. She would leave the lights on for Shaoan when he came home at night, and would care for the scars on his hands from the cold. She would even tease and test Shaoan, "Young general, do you have a crush?" Shaoan smiled but said nothing, his earlobes turning a little red. Now those good times are gone. I carefully brought the dishes to the table. They were still Shaoan's favorites. But the atmosphere was completely different. My mother stopped joking and joking. She stood afar off, head bowed, as if afraid to look at Shaoan. In the moonlight, her face still bore the scars Lu Muyao had inflicted. Shaoan was visibly distressed. He put down his chopsticks several times, trying to speak. But nothing came out. Finally, he found a topic. "Where's the apricot blossom wine?" Apricot blossom wine, my mother brewed it just for Shaoan, because he'd mentioned he liked the scent of apricot blossoms. Every time I offered it to Shaoan, I pouted unhappily, "Big brother, my sister is so stupid. She won't sell this wine to other customers no matter how much they offer. We're losing so much money." Shaoan looked up at my mother, who shyly turned her back. At this moment, Shaoan looked up at my mother again, but she didn't turn her back. She just stood there quietly, gazing out the window. Shaoan followed her gaze. Outside the window, the rainstorm had just passed, and the tree trunks were bare. The apricot blossoms had already fallen. 9 After that, Shaoan never came again. From time to time, the sound of horses galloping could be heard on the street outside. It was Shaoan leading his personal soldiers to the Dalyui camp. He passed by here every day, but he never came in to look. My mother and I got up before dawn every day to light the fire and cook, but often no customers came until closing time. Things seemed to be getting worse and worse. Not only were there no customers, but there were also a few idle men and old women squatting at the door, insulting my mother with obscene words that were unbearable to hear. They said that my mother was hanging out with nobles everywhere, and she was determined to climb into the bed of a prince. They also said that my mother, seeing that Yunying was unmarried, had secretly cheated on men countless times, and was a slut who had been played with and discarded by countless young men. I rushed out and hit them with a fire poker. They were not afraid, and they teased me, pinched me, and kicked me with a smile. It wasn't until the sound of military boots tapping against the bluestone pavement that I turned and saw Shaoan dressed in black. The night dew was heavy, and his forehead was slightly damp, evidently having been standing in the shadows for a while. I had been gritting my teeth in silence, but the moment I saw Shaoan, I burst into tears. Shaoan ordered his guards to take the idle men and women away, while he lifted me up. "Where's your sister?" I sobbed. "She's locked herself in her room, and won't come out. She ignores me when I call her. The door is locked and I can't open it." Shaoan's expression suddenly changed. He carried me into the backyard and kicked open the door to the wing room. Then, from the room, my shrill cries echoed, "Sister!" My mother had hanged herself from the beam. Shaoan cut the white silk with a knife and carried her down. Her eyes were closed, her face pale, like a snowman about to melt. I cried until my voice was hoarse. "Sister, sister, please don't die. You're all I have." You're all I have. Shaoan hugged my mother, calling her repeatedly, Lanfu, wake up. That was my mother's name. Back then, when Shaoan was patronizing the food stall, my mother had deliberately left a handkerchief embroidered with her name and a vivid orchid. Shaoan didn't pick it up, letting it fall to the ground. Now it seems that the handkerchief remained in his heart, unpicked. The battle for the heart is so long. Step by step, now, the most crucial moment has finally arrived. Amidst Shaoan's constant calls, my mother finally struggled to open her eyes. The moment she saw it was Shaoan, she closed her eyes, and a tear slipped down her cheeks. Your Highness shouldn't have come. Shaoan suddenly grew angry. I really shouldn't have come. After all, I came here to see your cold face. He closed his eyes, a vein throbbing in his forehead. Why, Shen Lanfu, you had so many opportunities to ask me for help, why didn't you ever ask? You knew those gossipers were sent by Lu Muyao, and you knew I was watching you from behind, yet you wouldn't even look at me. Is it because I lied to you that you wouldn't ask me for a favor even if you died? Shaoan finished, panting slightly. I'd never seen him so emotional. My mother waited quietly for Shaoan to finish his outburst, then lowered her head and whispered, Is your Highness finished? If you are, please go back. She didn't finish the sentence. Shaoan sealed her lips with a kiss. As our lips met, he gritted his teeth and said, Shen Lanfu, are you going to chase me away again? 11. The air between the gauze curtains was filled with fragrant mist. I sat in the courtyard, splitting charcoal piece by piece, and throwing it into the incense burner. The fragrance was truly wonderful. Exactly the same as the one on my mother. Shaoan didn't come out until dawn. I had already helped him feed his horse and clean his knife. I lowered my head as I handed him the knife. He squatted down and asked, Why are you crying? I held back my tears and said, I'm so happy for my sister, but I'm also so scared for her. I must have looked so pitiful crying. Shaoan's face was filled with emotion. He squatted down and touched my head. I'll protect you from now on. Ning, you don't have to fear anything. The day my mother was brought into the palace, Lu Muyao went berserk. She drew her sword, intending to kill my mother, but suddenly saw a row of people kneeling at the gate. They were the idle men and women Lu Muyao had sent to the gate to humiliate and abuse my mother. At that moment, each of them had their tongues pulled out, and they let out muffled screams. The scene was so horrifying that Lu Muyao fainted on the spot. When she woke up, she smashed the porcelain in the room, screaming, Bitch, you will definitely get your comeuppance. The people in the palace were no longer as fearful of her as before. Everyone knew that the prince's favorite woman had shifted from Lu Muyao to Shen Lanfu. But Shen Lanfu wasn't as lawless as Lu Muyao. On the contrary, she was docile and respectful. On her second day in the palace, she offered tea to the princess. Princess Cui sat in the Buddhist hall, dressed in plain clothes, beating a wooden fish. Upon hearing my mother enter, she simply said, I never thought anyone in this palace would even remember me. Cui had long been neglected in the palace. Shaoan didn't favor her, Lu Muyao bullied her, and the servants dared to belittle her. Even when she lost a child at the hands of Lu Muyao, Shaoan simply said, Muyao didn't mean it. The difference between love and hate was so stark. From then on, Cui retreated to the Buddhist hall, her heart broken. No one remembered this incompetent mistress anymore. Everyone in the palace, from top to bottom, respected Lu Muyao. But at this moment, my mother offered tea and whispered, I will always remember the princess. She nudged me, Aining, you've accepted the gift, but you haven't thanked the princess yet. I held out the pair of little golden rabbits. On their bases was a tiny, Cui character. I said, Aining, thank you, princess. Cui's hands trembled, and a wave of shock flashed across her eyes, those always calm. She remembered. During that devastating turmoil, Cui was the only person in the palace who had helped my father. She had embraced Buddhism and remained a vegetarian, so she didn't attend the roasted lamb feast. By the time she saw the flames rising to the sky and rushed over, my father was already on the fire, burned beyond recognition. Chui had long since withdrawn from the world, determined not to argue with Lu Muyao again. But that day, she still pointed at Lu Muyao and flew into a rage. "You've trampled on human life, causing so much suffering. Aren't you afraid of going to hell?" Lu Muyao smiled at Chui. "Oh sister, didn't you decide to stay out of worldly affairs? Why are you so angry? Could it be that even living in the Buddhist temple doesn't bring peace of mind? Is the person roasting on the fire your lover?" Having said that, Lu Muyao finally waved her hand and said, "No, this lamb isn't roasted well. I'll just throw it out." Chui knew she shouldn't interfere. Shaoan was too partial to Lu Muyao. If she displeased her, she would be the one to suffer in the end. But in the end, she couldn't bear it. While sending someone to notify my father's fellow villagers, she opened my father's bundle. Inside was a list, with the words "Buy a pair of little golden rabbits for Aining." That's right, the little golden rabbits in that bundle. My father didn't buy them, he hadn't had time to do it yet. It was Chui who, upon looking at the list, burst into tears. Then, returning to her boudoir, she pulled out a pair of small golden rabbits from her dowry. They were a legacy left to her by her long-deceased father. She placed the rabbits in her father's bag. Helping a father, she gave his daughter his final gift. And so a cowardly mistress, forced into the temple, and a lowly concubine, drifting like a floating duckweed, stared at each other silently in the sunlight. Fate's connections finally aligned perfectly at this moment. My mother bowed deeply and said, Your Highness has helped me once. I dare to ask you to do it again." Hatred is, in fact, the strongest emotion in the world, far more enduring than love. But hatred often lurks beneath the surface, silent and unnoticed. People only knew that the palace had become quiet. Shaoan came to my mother's room every night, and she would prepare a bowl of steaming mutton soup to soothe his day's fatigue. Chui continued chanting in the Buddhist temple, a forgotten princess. As for Lu Muyao, she had become unusually quiet. No more crying, no more fussing, no more jealousy of my mother. But my mother and I both knew her hatred had grown deep, flowing beneath still waters, bound to burst forth one day. Sure enough, one remarkably peaceful night, my mother, as usual, prepared mutton soup and waited for Shaoan. But he never arrived. My mother waited until dawn, when finally, there was a knock at the gate. It was Lu Muyao's maid. She looked at my mother, her eyebrows raised. "Madam Shen, come with me." My mother had been forced to her knees at Lu Muyao's feet. I tried to rescue her, but two servants grabbed her arms, one on each side, and pinned her down in the hall. "Your Highness!" I cried to the hall, "Why is this happening? Didn't you say you'd protect us?" Before I could finish my words, I was slapped in the face. Lu Muyao flicked her wrist. "Little bitch, your sister did such a shameful thing, and you still have the nerve to call me prince." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at Shaoan. He sat at the highest point, propping up his head, his eyes downcast, not looking at me or my mother. His expression was extremely grim. My mother's face grew paler and paler. Unable to stand, she could only struggle to say, "Miss Muyao, Aining is still young. Tell me anything you want to say." Lu Muyao smiled, "Don't worry. Your turn will be here soon. Wait until the witness comes up, then you can speak slowly." She waved her hand, "Bring them up." Two maids came up, carrying an elderly woman. The woman was probably 80 years old, with snow-white hair and hands covered in goosebumps. Her eyes were dull and cloudy. My mother's face turned pale the moment she saw her. Lu Muyao, observing my mother's face, burst into laughter. "So do you recognize her?" My mother and I both knew her. This elderly woman was Mrs. Lu from the alley down the street. "Ms. Lu, just be frank. Why have you brought such a demented old woman up here?" The questioner was Mrs. Chui. Because the matter involved the inner chambers, she had also come today. Lu Muyao had always hated Chui the most. Seeing her asking the question, she smiled coldly. This old lady Lu had a stroke at the beginning of this year, and it is true that she is not very clear-headed. But before that, she was a well-known witch doctor in the Central Plains. She can make poisons and use goo, and what's even better is, she can turn a married woman back to her virginity. With every word she said, my mother's face turned paler. As if enjoying my mother's pain, Lu Muyao stared at my mother's face, and finally smiled brightly. Auntie Lan, you also went to old lady Lu for treatment, right? Shaoan stared at my mother's face. My mother lowered her head. I say no, Your Highness, do you believe me? Stop pretending to be pitiful. Lu Muyao snapped. It doesn't matter if you deny it. Let old lady Lu identify it herself. Lu Muyao pulled old lady Lu toward her, pointed at my mother's face, and said, look carefully. Has this woman ever come to your house? Old lady Lu stared at my mother with cloudy eyes for a long moment before slowly nodding. There was a sound of a teacup shattering. Shaoan had accidentally dropped the cup in his hand. The fragments flew, and one cut Shaoan's hand, blood dripping down, but he seemed to feel no pain. Shaoan stood up and walked away, never once looking at my mother. Lu Muyao laughed. She leaned over and spat in my mother's face. Bitch! Dare to seduce the prince, and this is what happens to you. My mother and I were locked in the woodshed in the backyard. It's said that at dawn, the elders of the clan would come, stuff my mother into a pig cage, and drown her in the pond. Shaoan rested in Lu Muyao's yard. He was said to have a headache, and Lu Muyao was carefully rubbing his head with ointment. It was cold in the woodshed, and outside, a large black dog barked incessantly. I was a little afraid of dogs, so I huddled in my mother's arms, shivering slightly. My mother stroked my head. My Ning has been wronged. She kissed the top of my head and hummed a nursery rhyme. The little pig is well fed, closing its eyes to sleep, its big ears flapping, its little tail wagging. When I was very little, my father always sang this song to lull me to sleep. I actually fell asleep. When I woke up, the woodshed door was open. Shaoan was standing outside, alone. He said, you can go. Long after, I would wonder if my mother was moved at that moment. Shaoan, the regent known for his suspicion, cold-bloodedness, and cruelty, was willing to secretly let her go despite knowing she was being deceived. This was a love that would move countless women. But I didn't have the chance to ask. Before my mother could answer Shaoan, a voice came from afar. Your Highness, something has changed. The one who arrived was a maid dressed in plain clothes, one of Chui's dowry. The princess took in Lu Pozi in the courtyard for a night, and then she felt that something was amiss. Lu Muyao was so confident that after she finished questioning her in court, she simply threw Lu Pozi out of the palace. Chui, a vegetarian and Buddhist for many years, couldn't bear to see an elderly woman with dementia living on the streets, so she sent someone to take her to her side courtyard, and asked the doctor who came to check on her pulse to also examine her. The doctor's face was strange after he finished. He said, it doesn't seem like this mother-in-law is truly demented, but rather someone drugged her. Chui immediately sensed something was amiss, and hurriedly sent for Shaoan. The imperial physician examined her in the room. After inducing vomiting, acupuncture, and herbal remedies, Granny Lu regained consciousness. She looked around, bewildered. At that moment, Chui pointed at my mother and asked Granny Lu, have you seen this woman? Granny Lu nodded. Just as Shaoan's face darkened again, Granny Lu said, yes, in the portrait that concubine Lu gave me. She made me look at the portrait repeatedly, then poured a bowl of medicine into my mouth. When I woke up, I was already here. As Shaoan carried my mother out of the wing room, Lu Muyao burst out from her courtyard. Ignoring the guards, she rushed towards Shaoan, her hair disheveled, and grabbed the hem of his robe. Brethren, I really didn't drug Granny Lu. I really didn't. Shaoan was no longer listening to her arguments. The evidence was complete, and all the neighbors around Mrs. Lu testified that it was Lu Muyao who stormed into Mrs. Lu's house and force-fed her drugs. Chui's men also searched Lu Muyao's room and found a portrait of my mother. So, no matter how much Lu Muyao cried and claimed she was wronged, Xiaoan refused to believe her. He simply looked at her with disgust and threw her onto the muddy, rain-soaked ground. I watched her cry and rage, then quietly climbed the wall and went to the back door of the palace. Mrs. Lu was standing there waiting for me. I stuffed a large bag of gold into her arms and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma. Please also thank the neighbors on my mother's behalf." Granny Lu didn't take the gold from me. She patted my head and sniffed, "Every time my mouth feels tasteless, I miss the lamb your father cooked." 18 Lu Muyao was grounded. She cried and raged in the house, begging to see Xiaoan. But Xiaoan refused to see her. He stayed in my mother's yard all day. When the first rain of autumn fell, Lu Muyao fell ill. Seriously. She had an old wound incurred for Xiaoan. Back on the battlefield in the northern frontier, she had blocked an arrow for him. The arrow had been poisoned, and although the blood had been quickly drained, some of the poison remained in her body. Now, perhaps from the days of depression or the cold weather, the old wound had flared up, and Lu Muyao was unconscious. Her personal maid knelt in the corridor, begging Xiaoan heartbreakingly, "Your Highness, please go see Miss Muyao for the last time. I'm afraid she's dying." Along with this request, a mottled love lock was handed over. There were indelible bloodstains on it, testifying to the years when the two had depended on each other for life and death. It was unforgettable after all. Xiaoan held the love lock tightly and looked at my mother. "I'll go see Muyao." My mother nodded obediently. Xiaoan entered Lu Muyao's courtyard, and the entire Imperial Hospital's doctors were also summoned. He hated her when she was throwing a tantrum. Now that she was dying, he couldn't bear to let her go. Countless rare medicinal herbs were poured into her, and 3 days later, Lu Muyao finally woke up from her coma. The first thing she did after waking up was to hug Xiaoan and burst into tears. "Brethren, I don't want to be alone forever. I'm too greedy. I shouldn't have done that. I just beg you not to abandon me, please don't leave me." In the study, Cui warmed up some hot tea and handed it to Xiaoan. She said, "My father has a house in Jiangnan, and a doctor he knows lives there. Why don't you let Muyao go there to recuperate?" Xiaoan rubbed his brow, hesitating. Cui whispered, "I know the prince has a past relationship with Muyao, but the doctor said you can't get angry while you're recuperating. The prince knows Muyao's temper too. If she stays in the mansion and sees concubine Lan again, what will happen? Besides, concubine Lan's belly is getting bigger every day." Cui was right. My mother was diagnosed with pregnancy when Lu Muyao was at her worst. For the child's safe birth, and so that Lu Muyao wouldn't get angry and hurt herself, Xiaoan finally agreed. Lu Muyao didn't want to leave. She cried bitterly, begging to see Xiaoan. "Brethren, I want to stay by your side. I won't go anywhere." Xiaoan gently soothed her. "Yaoa, when you recover, I'll come and pick you up." Lu Muyao was helpless, sobbing until she fainted, and was put on a carriage bound for Jiangnan. Time passed quickly. At first, Xiaoan was concerned about Lu Muyao, and would occasionally ask Cui about her well-being. Later, Xiaoan's inquiries gradually became less frequent. His thoughts were all on my mother. My mother had actually aged, fine lines forming around her eyes, and her beauty had dimmed. But she was still a wonderful cook. Xiaoan still loved her mutton soup the most. He missed it terribly if he didn't have it for a few days. When my mother served him mutton soup again, he stroked her hair and sighed softly, "Lanfu, you've got gray hair." My mother smiled but said nothing. She had actually had gray hair for a long time. The night my father died, her hair turned white overnight. The black hair Xiaoan had worn when he first met her was dyed with ebony paste. My mother's pregnancy was getting worse, and the imperial physician said she shouldn't sleep with Xiaoan anymore. In the long silence of the night, Xiaoan's eyes fell on me. I was already 13 years old. Like a budding branch, I gradually opened up, shedding my childish appearance and entering the prime of my youth. Xiaoan often came to my mother's yard. He first talked about the story of a Huang and Vying, and then mentioned the Zhou concubine and the Zhou concubine. The idea was that sisters share the same husband. My mother still smiled meekly. I'm afraid we don't have such a blessing. Xiaoan hugged her in his arms. How could it be? You and Ning are both blessed. He didn't understand. My mother said that the unlucky person was obviously him. She wanted to kill him. 20 That winter, Xiaoan fell ill. The illness was very severe. Cui led the female relatives to take turns to care for him. I originally thought it was nothing serious, but within just half a month, the illness became more and more serious. Several female relatives were scolded by Xiaoan while tending to him, and they had scars on their bodies. Everyone could see that Xiaoan was suspicious. He got so sick for no reason. There was only one possibility, except for bad luck. That was someone around him was trying to harm him. On the day when the snow had just cleared up, Xiaoan asked my mother and me to go tend to him. He said that he had no taste in his mouth from all the medicine he had taken these days, and he wanted to try the mutton soup my mother had made. My mother made the soup and served it to Xiaoan. But he didn't drink it. Instead, he looked at me with a smile. Aining, come here, drink the soup. My mother paused. What is the prince doing? Xiaoan didn't speak. He whispered, Lan Fu, why does the soup you make always have a strange fragrance? My mother said, because it contains my blood. Xiaoan raised his eyes slightly and looked at my mother. He looked much more gloomy during his illness. He looked at my mother and said, your blood. But you don't even have a wound on your body. My mother didn't answer. She just whispered, Your Highness is suspicious. I'd like to drink first. She raised the bowl to drink, but Xiaoan blocked her hand. Let Ning drink, he whispered. Lan Fu, I know you love Ning the most. I walked over, picked up the bowl, and drank it all in one gulp. It was so delicious. The milky and fragrant soup flowed into my lungs, and the intense pleasure almost made me tremble. Seeing that I drank every drop, Xiaoan's eyes became gentler. Maybe because of his illness, his thoughts drifted far away, all the way to the northern frontier. Mu Yao, how is she? I originally thought of taking her back after you gave birth to the child, but now I am sick too. My mother did not respond. She put away the bowl and said, Your Highness, do you want to drink mutton soup tomorrow? No. Xiaoan said wearily. Okay. My mother said, after all, there are not many good pieces of meat on Miss Mu Yao's body. The room suddenly became very quiet. Xiaoan turned to look at my mother, and he said in a lost voice, What did you say? 21 My mother laughed. She said, I told the prince, the rich aroma in this soup is from my blood. She raised her wrist, which was as smooth as jade, without a single scratch. Besides me, who else does the prince have as a concubine? Xiaoan's eyes widened. He tried to stand but fell back halfway. You killed her? You and Cui conspired to kill her. Xiaoan was clever. Even in this state, he still managed to react instantly. He slammed the bed. Why? Mu Yao doesn't deserve death. He didn't remember. He only knew that Lu Muyao had burned my mother's leg, and had given Lu Pozi drugs to frame her. And that Lu Muyao had caused Cui Shi to miscarry and lose her child. To him, these were just internal jealousies, not mortal grudges. As for the others, those who died because of Lu Muyao were mere ants in Xiaoan's world. He had no memory of them. My mother rubbed her forehead and said, Ning, I'm tired. You go talk to the prince. Okay, mother. Xiaoan's eyes widened. He stared at me, as if he'd seen a ghost. What did you call her? I told Xiaoan a story. I said, you admire my mother's beauty, but there are others who aren't. My father wasn't one of them. Because the year he met my mother, she wasn't pretty at all. She was among the refugees, thin as a bean sprout, her hair tangled, revealing only a pair of bright eyes. Someone tried to snatch her steamed bun, and she lunged at him. When she couldn't get it, she bit him with her teeth, her mouth filled with blood. My father helped my mother beat the man, then broke off half of his own bun and gave it to her. My mother wolfed it down and said, "I'm hungry." So my father had to give her the remaining half. After she finished hers, she became embarrassed and lowered her head, saying, "Still hungry?" My father said nothing. My mother thought this half-grown boy must be fed up, and didn't want to be with her anymore. Just as my mother sauntered to squat by the wall, my father came running back. "It's all here," he handed her the bag of dry food. He added, "Just wait. I'll bring you the best food in the world." He kept his promise. Over the next decade or so, he learned every culinary delicacy in the world and cooked them for her. They had a daughter and their own small shop, and their future looked bright and fulfilling. But then the regent in the capital heard about his cooking, and asked him to roast lamb. I went to the cellar and retrieved Lu Muyao. She and Shaoan had sworn a vow on the snowy mountains, vowing to be together forever. They were destined to die together. With her last breath, Lu Muyao cursed me, "Little bitch, I know who you are. You look exactly like that pariah, who deserved to be roasted. Wait until I tell the prince." She froze. Because she saw Shaoan's limbs were tied, strung up on a pile of wood. Here at the first sheep, I pointed at him, then looked into Lu Muyao's eyes, admiring the fear that surged like a raging storm. "You the second one." 24 the month after Shaoan and Lu Muyao died, my mother gave birth to a child. She gave the child to Chui. Chui had always wanted a child, but because of Lu Muyao, she would never have one. Chui held the swaddled baby, tears of joy streaming down her face. She asked my mother, "Where are you going?" My mother smiled, shed her fine clothes, and put on a coarse linen dress. "To where I belong." Old Lady Lu at the end of the alley, and all the neighbors noticed. The small shop was open again. The aroma wafted far and wide. The warmth touched the hearts of every customer. 25 many years later, a famine struck near the capital, and many refugees poured into the capital. The ladies of the wealthy families set up porridge stalls and provided it to the refugees. My mother was among them. She was old, no longer beautiful, but with a gentle smile, she looked like a gracious female bodhisattva. A half-grown boy came to beg for porridge, repeatedly asking for bowl after bowl. The other refugees were not happy and wanted to beat him. My mother quickly led her men to stop him. She asked the boy, "Don't you have enough to eat?" The boy shyly shook his head and pointed to a haystack in the distance, where a little girl was peeking out. "She always says she's hungry," he said sheepishly. "She says she's hungry after one bowl, then another, and she's still hungry." After so many years, my mother's eyes were red. She wiped them and said, "It's enough, all of it. Aining, take someone to your mother Chui's place and bring 20 more bags of rice." I directed the cart to bring more rice. The refugees had enough porridge. The boy brought a large bowl to the little girl, and watched her drink it. "Are you still hungry?" "Not hungry anymore." "I'm glad you're not hungry." The little boy patted his chest. "Just wait, I'll bring you the most delicious food in the world." End.